Hello, my name is Cooper Ford, and my topic is e-waste disposal in West Africa in terms of environmental justice and human health. So my paper is basically discussing the causes of and consequences to human health of historical and current e-waste disposal methods in West Africa, as well as some of the legal frameworks that have shaped how the practice has developed and enabled it to continue. So e-waste means electronic waste. It's a public health issue emerging from basically the rapid expansion of electronics consumption and industry. E-waste contains all sorts of toxic chemicals and metals. These are unfortunately necessary for the manufacture of electronics products. And so, yeah, these substances will be around and they will need to be accounted for in terms of their impact on the environment and on us humans. But because they can be dangerous, it's really expensive to recycle and dispose of e-waste in developed nations, which tend to have enforceable environmental regulation. So companies or nations that need to offload e-waste want to do it as cheaply as possible under a capitalist system, and that is where West Africa comes in. And really, there are a few other particular regions across the globe, but West Africa I wanted to focus on in this paper. It's a region with unreliable environmental regulation and enforcement, and it is also not very visible to the developed world. I'm talking countries like Ghana, Nigeria, Benin, Ivory Coast. These are countries which are far less capable or even incapable of responsibly handling this type of waste due to harsh economic realities, unstable or corrupt government, lack of investment in public health, environmental protection. The list goes on. And the disproportionate effects of e-waste on the people and environment of these nations is really what is kind of at the heart of the environmental justice aspect of e-waste. So there are a lot of harmful chemicals in e-waste, which I list in my paper. Some like PCBs, PBDF, PCDD, DLPCBs, heavy metals like lead, cadmium, nickel, mercury, chromium, arsenic. There's a lot of these persistent organic pollutants, also known as POPs. These are substances which bioaccumulate in wildlife and livestock. They make their way into humans eventually. And in this context, these substances are released when laborers use informal recycling methods like acid bathing, burning, barehanded dismantling. These kinds of methods are known as informal because there are basically no protections or oversight for safety. It's really just impoverished people in these regions trying to create work and scrape by. These workers are at much higher risk for respiratory illnesses, heart conditions, cancer, endocrine and immune dysfunction, as well as neurodegenerative effects. And pregnant women and children are particularly at risk. And many workers on these sites are children and teenagers and women, tragically. Um, just for some perspective, 2022 saw the production of roughly 62 million tons of e-waste. It's a lot and it will continue growing. And because of the persistence and danger of the substances contained in e-waste and produced by low quality recycling, it needs to be properly handled and disposed of. In my paper, I also go over some of the international legal efforts to manage the movement of e-waste and mitigate its environmental impacts as well. Two of the most prominent are the Basel Convention and the Bamako Convention. These, among other smaller conventions, were established in the 80s and early 90s and basically create legislative frameworks and networks of accountability for nations to implement. The Basel Convention has 191 member parties, and the Bamako Convention is reserved just for African nations, of which 30 are participating. So while these conventions are definitely useful, they both encounter the same problems of one, enforceability, and two, nation participation. At the end of the day, it's up to the participating nations to implement the recommendations of the conventions. And additionally, both conventions suffer from vague language, which enables legal loopholes for exporter nations to follow. Both are also limited by the lack of participation from the largest producer and exporter of e waste globally, the United States. Still, while they leave a lot to be desired and are limited in their hard power to enforce their guidelines, they are important tools for managing the environment and human health impacts of e waste globally. Um, I think that probably the most interesting concept in this topic is the international politics which are at play. On the one hand, you have almost 200 nations admitting this problem and at least somewhat participating in international conventions to monitor and mitigate it. Meanwhile, the nation which is arguably the capitalist core of the world and currently most responsible for e-waste, the United States, refuses to participate. This is a big environmental injustice where rich nations displace their impacts onto less developed nations. And I think that the regulatory world of environmental justice was pretty fascinating generally to read about, and how there are a lot of specifics in my paper that I left out of the speech because, this is such a nuanced and time consuming issue to talk about, but definitely worth investigating in personal time. But that is all. Thank you very much.